Today's the 30th. Okay. Well, I guess we are on the air. Welcome to Grace Baptist Church's Adult One Bible Study. My name is Norm Ellis, and I'm glad you're with us today, wherever you may be, whether it's be right here, munching down on donuts and such, or online. Glad to have you with us. And today we're going to be in Daniel chapter 3. Daniel chapter 3, so make sure you have your Bibles ready. And if you have a lesson book, we are on session number 9, which starts on page 82. So that should give you all the particulars. And our study today is called Demonstrate Allegiance. Demonstrate Allegiance. So let's go ahead and begin with a word of prayer, and then we'll start. Heavenly Father, thank you again for this day. Sunshine, no rain lately. Thank you for all that you've done for us, the blessings, Lord. Thank you for your word that we get a chance to study and learn so much from. Pray that you be with those that are at home online right now viewing us, that they are doing well, and be with those that are here at church and those that are on their way here. Keep them safe as they travel too. And I just thank you for all you've done. I just pray that you'd open our hearts to your words. In Jesus' name, amen. So today is called Demonstrate Allegiance. We're in Daniel chapter 3, like I said. And the main idea is that believers, Christians, must stand for God regardless of the potential costs. Ooh, that's making me uncomfortable, Norm. What do you mean, potential costs? What's that? 20, 30 bucks? No, not that kind of cost. So, but we're going to be exploring this with Daniel's 3 friends. Daniel is curiously absent from this account. And there's various reasons I've read that could be the accounting for this. We don't know. He was made in charge of the palace and activities there in Babylon. And it very well could be that he had some responsibilities also in other places of the kingdom. He'd just been elevated to that position by King Nebuchadnezzar. We don't know. It's one of those things where, why is it that way? I don't know. But he was not there for one reason or another. Maybe he had COVID. I don't know. Anyway, but he's not there. But his 3 compatriots, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they are the focus of our study today. So we'll be looking at how they deal with a situation that arises there in Babylon in the plains of Dura. Plains of Dura. Where are the plains of Dura? We don't know that either, exactly. But they have some good ideas. There's a couple of places. They know that it was within the province of Babylon itself. So that's narrowed down. There are some places that could be candidates, but they're outside that area. So we're pretty sure that's not it. It was probably not far from the city of Babylon, because the whole idea of the statue we're going to talk about is for people to come and bow down there, right? So very probable site is about 6, 7, 8 miles outside, southeast, I think, of Babylon. There is this plateaued area, flat area. And curiously, there is the ruins of what appears to be a brick pedestal of some sort. We don't know. It's the ruins. We can't really tell. Could it have been the statue on that place? Maybe. We don't know. It could have been some other thing. It's hard to say. And but we're going to explore the circumstances around this. But let's talk about a few things first. And what kinds of symbols come to mind when you think of the characteristics or traits of the word allegiance? What kind of characteristics or traits are associated with that word allegiance, do you think? Anybody? The American flag. Now, and that is kind of a symbol of allegiance. Well, what kind of characteristics go along with that? Maybe what traits go along with that? Because you're right, it definitely is. That's the first thing that pops in everybody's mind, right? Loyalty, okay, I like that. Commitment, yeah. Maybe steadfastness to something, right? There's a lot of things like that. And if you've learned anything by now, which some of you have, some of you haven't, if you look at my handouts, sometimes I hide things in there. On the second page of the first handout at the bottom, it says allegiance. I put it there for a reason so you wouldn't see it right off the bat when I asked that question, right? Allegiance is the displaying of loyalty or the commitment of a subordinate to a superior or an individual to a group or cause. It is the obligation, it is the obligation of loyalty to a nation, sovereign, or cause. A devoted citizen will have allegiance to his or her country first. Similar words, devotion, faithfulness, dedication, commitment, fidelity, attachment, alignment, duty, and fealty. Now, there's an old-fashioned word, fealty. Now, that has to do with back in the old days when they had kings that would set up these areas, and you were part of a little kingdom, and you would give fealty to your sovereign Lord. It was that kind of a thing. One verse comes to mind in Mark 12:17, when Jesus said to them, the Jewish authorities who are giving him a hard time, of course, they were always doing that, right? He said, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, but to God the things that are God." And they were amazed at him. They thought they had him caught in one of their little traps, but he showed them otherwise, right? So these have to deal with that word allegiance. So when an interesting thing I'm going to have Lee do for me right now, and we're going to also use it probably a second time, so don't delete it or anything. Also, do this if you're uniform. What is this sound? Okay, can somebody tell me what this sound is that is not connected with the military? You're close, maybe. You're not too far off. Anybody else know? Okay, you probably don't know, and that's okay. But if you look again in my handouts, page 3 of handout 1, it says ruffles and flourishes. What you just heard was something called ruffles and flourishes. What is a ruffle and a flourish? It says, anyway, it goes on, the U.S. Air Force and other military branches has many customs and courtesies, and that's true. I'm here to tell you. 30 years in the Air Force, I know. One of these that I learned while I was in the Air Force in basic training is the musical phrase known as ruffles and flourishes. You just heard it played 4 times. Well, he did 2 times, 4 times. So I guess it was 8 times. But anyway, it's played to honor certain individuals. It consists of a drum roll, the ruffle, and the trumpet fanfare, the flourish. Commissioned officers in the grade of Brigadier General, which is a 1-star, they receive 1 ruffle and 1 flourish. Major generals, they rate 2. Lieutenant generals rate 3. And 4-star generals rate 4, what you just heard. Also rating 4 on certain occasions are such distinguished civilians as the president. Now, that's where you may have heard this before. Because in ceremonies, when the president comes on the scene, you will sometimes hear these 4 ruffles and flourishes, and then you'll hear a certain song. What's that song? Hail to the Chief, right? Yeah. Marine Corps Band, yes. Matter of fact, I think that's who this recording is from that. So that you'll hear Hail to the Chief. Da, 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 or something like that. Is that the right one? Yeah. And also, by the way, and I didn't know this, but they'll also do that for the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. They'll also do it for cabinet members, heads of state of foreign countries, etc. For the ruffles and flourishes, not the Hail to the Chief. The 4 ruffles and flourishes are the maximum they play. You know, so if you're a 5-star general like Patton, too bad, you're only getting 4. Anyway, it goes on to say indoors. Upon hearing the ruffles and flourishes indoors, if you are in uniform, come to attention, face the individual being honored, and remain in attention until the last note of the music has been played. If you're in civilian clothes, you follow that same procedure as though you were in uniform. Outdoors, upon hearing the ruffles and flourishes, outdoors, while in uniform, come to attention, face the individual being honored, and present arms. Salute. Hold that, salute, remaining at attention until the last note of the music has been played, and then you retire your salute. So the individual being honored also salutes, by the way. If they don't, shame on them. Military personnel in civilian clothes face the individual being honored and stand at attention. This I learned while I was in basic training. This little thing came out of the manual for teaching recruits and such. And so I remembered it pretty much all this years, but I had to dig it out. What's that? Yes, we'll play it for Matthew Whitty. That's a good idea. Is he a 1-star or 2-star pastor? A 1/4 star. Anyway, I have heard ruffles and flourishes played live on at least 2 occasions that I can remember. One was a commander's call, and I can't remember where I was stationed at the time. It might have been Edwards Air Force Base. It might have been some other place. And we were at commander's call, and our commander was getting an award. Now, the commander was a colonel. So who gives you the award? A higher ranking person. Who's higher than a colonel? 1-star general. That's all he got. But that's all you needed. I heard one ruffle and one flourish. We all stood at attention when we heard that note, and we saluted and all that stuff. It was interesting. The other time I heard it live was in 1980, I think it was 4. I'm not positive. Ronald Reagan was president, and as Edwards Air Force Base for sure, and we were all around because he knew the president was coming, all around the place where it was going to be, and the space shuttle had just landed, and the astronauts were being shipped over, and Ronald Reagan came out to speak. That's the only time I've ever seen a president in the flesh. And when he came out, they played those 4 ruffles and flourishes, and they played Hail to the Chief. It's quite an experience being there and seeing all that. Anyway, you're going to say something? Yeah. Zommel, yeah. How many did he get? Did he get 4? Yeah, I can't remember. Yeah, that would make sense. Anyway, and like I said, this was the Air Force version. There's a naval version. There's a Marine version. There's probably an Army version of all this stuff. So anyway, what does that have to do with anything? Good question. You guys always ask great questions. No, not really. Sometimes you ask. Anyway, going on in our introductions, is many students in the United States begin their school days by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. And some don't, and I know that. Some states may also include a Pledge of Allegiance to their state flag as well. I didn't know that. People declare their allegiance to many things, to their job, their families, or their favorite sports teams. However, God's call to his children to demonstrate ultimate allegiance to him far surpasses any other commitments we have. And that is a true statement. And one of the things I was thinking about is pledging your allegiance to various things. And the marriage ceremony, don't you do that to each other? Don't you pledge your allegiance to each other? And it does. Anyway, that's an aside. Okay, going on. It is an interesting thing, though, when I was in the Air Force going through that experience. So, just about every instance, people who express allegiance are pledging their loyalty to someone more powerful or something bigger than themselves. So, in this study we're going to be looking at today, we will see how God protected those who showed allegiance to him alone, as far as God, okay? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were faithful to God to the point of being willing to die in a fiery furnace. That's a scary thing. We're going to be looking harder at that in just a moment. In our lesson book, there's something called the Understand the Context, and it's on page 83 if you want to follow along. But there was, in the context of this, we're going to look at a dream that the king had, Nebuchadnezzar had. And remember, he gave them, the wise they had to tell him what the dream was and then interpret it. What? How can you do that? Well, if you're a wise person, you should know these things, I guess is his rationale. No one could do it. No one except Daniel, right? We know that story, right? Daniel recited to him, "O king, this is what your dream was." And it was a picture of a huge statue, if you remember this, right? And the statue was a head of gold. And who was the head of gold? Nebuchadnezzar, right? Then there was, I think, the neck was something else, and the shoulders were something else, and the legs were something else, and the feet, and then the toes. The toes were the last ones, and there was the 10 toes, and they were a mixture of clay and iron, I believe. And while King Nebuchadnezzar was watching this, what happened to that statue? Interesting. Yes, a rock came from heaven and crushed the feet, right? Which caused, of course, the whole thing to topple, I'm sure. But this is what the king had. And so no one knew that dream except Daniel alone. Why did he know it? Because God gave him that insight, right? God let him understand what this dream was about. And he explained to him who that head was you. And then there was following, it was another kingdom. Each kingdom, successive kingdom, was lesser than the previous one. And so he has this dream, and he rewards Daniel because he's the only one who can tell him what this dream is about. And Daniel is put in charge of, he's like second in command. Now, think about this. Here's this young man, arguably a slave, drug out of his home country, put into the situation where he's to serve the king, right? And what? Where is he now? He's been elevated, and he's now in charge of, I think, the royal palace in Babylon, and in charge of a lot of the things that are going on there. So, do you think this is an interesting time for Daniel, this young man? Oh, yes. Yes, it is. So we had this experience, and we're going to relate back to it a little bit. But now, roll the clock forward a little bit, and what do we see happening? Well, we're going to talk about that here in a moment. I'm going to read a few verses, and then we'll jump into the lesson part here. In chapter 3, it says, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, the height of which was 60 cubits, and its width was 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar and the king sent word to assemble the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, and the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the province to come to the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then the satraps, prefects, governors, and counselors, and treasurers, and judges, and magistrates, and all the rulers of the province were assembled for the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And they all stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, To you the command is given, O peoples, nations, and men of every language, that at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of instruments, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast in the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. So we're going to stop there for a moment. So we see that the king had this dream. Daniel interpreted it for him. So what does the king do later? Makes a statue. Yeah. Well, think about it. He's probably thinking he's fulfilling his dream here, right? But he makes the whole statue gold. He doesn't make just the head gold. He makes the whole thing gold, right? Now, this is an interesting thing. How much gold would be involved in making a solid gold statue like this? A lot of gold. Now, was it solid? Probably not. It was probably overlaid. That's what they believe. Because, he probably could get that much gold. We're talking hundreds of tons of gold. Because this statue was, if you convert it into what we can understand, it was about 90 feet high. That's about 9 stories, folks. Wow. And it was about 9 feet in diameter. And the gold needed to overlay, just to overlay it by a 60th of an inch, would be around 50 tons. That's a lot of gold just by itself, I would say. Now, it was probably a wooden statue, because this is how they would do it. And then they had goldsmiths that would take gold, flatten out in sheets, and they would attach it, and they'd tap it down, smooth it over, and that's how they would make these statues like this. So very possibly that's what it was. And they set it up in what they call the plain of Dura, and I've mentioned this already. We don't really know what the plain of Dura is, but it's probably somewhere not that far from Babylon. And it was in such a location you could see it gleaming in the sunlight, probably for several miles. Do you imagine that sight? What a sight that would be, right? Now, why did the king do this? Why did he set up this statue like this? Anybody got any ideas? He had a big head, a big golden head. What's that? He thought highly of himself? Well, there's no doubt about that. He was the leader of the known world, right? Well, a lot of it was probably tied up in establishing and holding on to power. A lot of times you see that. Emperors and kings will do big building projects that will unify their country. There was an emperor named Hadrian. Have you heard the name Hadrian before? Maybe, yeah. You stole my thunder. Maybe you've heard it in reference to a wall, Hadrian's Wall. I've been to England and Scotland. I've seen Hadrian's Wall. It's not that impressive nowadays, but the fact that it was from the time of Rome and still exists in pieces and parts along east to west across England, across the Isle of whatever you call it. Anyway, no, it's the main island. English. Anyway, but it's an impressive thing to see, and they theorize that he did that to help consolidate his hold on the kingdom as well. But that's one of the reasons why. Also, it had to do with their worship. There was many gods worshipped in Babylon, and who was in charge of all that? Do you think? The king. So this image of the king would be representative, basically, of what all they worship. Okay, along with the fact that he's the king. And you give homage to the king. We talked about that in allegiance, right? So this was the reason why they were doing it, is to establish control over all these groups of people that they mentioned and to unify it under him only. And so was it just purely worship? Probably not. But there was definitely that element built into it because it says so right there, right? Anyway, going on here, it says each of the kingdoms is, okay, that was oh, yeah, I forgot to mention this part. Daniel was made prominent, of course, in the Babylonian kingdom. We mentioned that before. He was ruler of the province, and he was in charge of all the wise men, too, by the way, which was another sticking point later. Daniel requested to the king that he make Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego managers of the province of Babylon. Interesting. More Jewish slaves, essentially, being put in charge of us. You see maybe a problem developing? Anyway, so sometime later, we see that Nebuchadnezzar made this statue. It represented his dream, and he declared that when the music was played, everyone must stop, bow down, and worship the image. If anyone was found not following this decree, anyone, by the way, meant anyone, that person would be thrown into a fiery furnace. There we go. There's our backdrop. A lot of backdrop, right? But that was important because we kind of skipped over that before, didn't really get a chance to talk further about that. Let's look at one of our first verses here. I think I stopped on verse 6, didn't I? Yeah, I didn't read verse 7. Let me read verse 7. Therefore, at that time, when all the peoples heard the sound of that flute, horn, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipes, and all kinds of music, all the people and nations of men of every language fell down, and they worshiped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And when I first read these verses, the first thing I thought about was the ruffles and flourishes. I don't know why, but I did. Because it's at the sound of that music, you come to attention. You face the person who's the honored person, and you give homage, or you give whatever, devotion or whatever, loyalty, whatever. You express that in that kind of attention you do. So it's kind of similar in a way. Now, we're not bowing down, I know that. But it's a similar kind of idea. That's why I use that for an example. So anyway, let's look at Daniel now 3, 8 through 12. I know somebody has that out there. Okay, go ahead.
For this reason, at the time that Chaldeans came forward and brought charges against the Jews, they responded and said to Nebuchadnezzar the king, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, and bagpipe, and all kinds of music, is to fall down and worship the golden image. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of the furnace of the blazing fire. There are certain Jews who you have appointed over the administration of the province of Babylon, namely Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have disregarded you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you have set up.
Okay, so now we see that, the statue set up. We played all of our instruments. Everybody went down and flat. Some people didn't do this. And who are these certain Chaldeans, by the way? Chaldeans, I've heard it both ways. Chaldeans. Anyway, who were they? Do we know? We know a little bit about them. They apparently were considered to be court astrologers. And it's not astrologers in the same sense that we think of astrologers, by the way. But they would study the stars, and they would interpret things for the king and tell of things that may be coming up and stuff. They were probably part of the same cadre of people that the magicians and the sorcerers, all those other people in the court that kind of had those kind of supposed talents. They approach the king, okay, and they bring their accusation. Undoubtedly, it says, and this is from another commentary I was reading. It says, undoubtedly there was resentment against these Jews who had been now placed over them by Nebuchadnezzar in charge of the province of Babylon, the most important part of the country, the empire, right? Because they were of a different race and they were a captive people. It was quite clear that the Chaldeans also, that the Jews did not worship the gods of Babylon and were actually a foreign element in the government. They saw in the fact that the Jews would not worship the image as an occasion to bring an accusation against them. Does that sound familiar, by the way? Didn't the Pharisees and Sadducees look for occasions for accusations against Jesus all the time and his disciples? Yeah, very similar, isn't it? It says the expression accused is a translation of an Aramaic expression common. It means they ate their pieces. That's I didn't know that. They ate their pieces when they say they accused them. That means to devour piece by piece. And it basically is, it brings up mind slander or malicious accusations, which devours the accuser piece by piece. Have you seen that happen before? It's a terrible thing when people do that, right? They were experts at this, apparently. The Chaldeans approached the king with the customary courtesies, addressing, "O king, live forever," when really they were thinking something else, probably. They reminded the king of the details of the decree and the penalty of disobedience, and so the stage was set for this accusation they made against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. First, they showed no regard for the king. Second, they do not serve the gods of the king. And third, they do not worship the golden image which Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now, that's quite an accusation. The gods that they worship, there was many of them, and I don't know if I gave them a copy of this to you guys this time or not, but we've looked at this before. Let me find it here real quick. There was, it's a handout number 3. I think you might have that. Anyway, there's some major ones. That means there was others besides, by the way. Anu, Bel Marduk, Nergal, boy, you got about Ea, Neel of Nippur, and Sin, which is a real appropriate name for a idol, I think. Anyway, these are like the main gods, and there's other gods besides those. So they're basically saying these gods that you, O king, are worshiping, that our country depends on to have a good harvest, to have large families, these people from this other land, they just basically put it aside and say it's not important. What do you think that would do if you were the king brought up in a culture like that? Would it make you a little mad? Just a tiny little mad? Probably would, wouldn't it, right? Anyway, so, but also, the thing that it also realizes this accusation they made was also a rebuke of the king himself. You put them in charge. So not only is he maybe angry at what he's doing, but he's also maybe angry for embarrassment purposes. These guys I put in charge are screwing up. Oh, that makes me look bad, right? I mean, it always does. If you're in charge, you put somebody in charge of something else that's under you, and they mess up, how does it make you look? Pretty bad, right? So that's probably also a component of this whole thing here. So it's clear that the Chaldeans had a deep-seated resentment against the Jews and felt the king had made a big mistake in trusting these foreigners with such high offices. They remind the king that the men were just Jews, different in race, culture from the Babylonians. The king had set them over the affairs of the whole province of Babylon, the most important area, the most important key province in the whole empire, and these guys were in charge. And the key to political security also says the personal loyalty of such officers should be beyond question. But, in other words, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, it should be beyond question. But it apparently wasn't, they're saying. They're pointing this out, right? The Chaldeans pointed out that these guys did not show any regard for the king himself, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So the second accusation was that they don't serve Nebuchadnezzar's gods. And that's more than just a religious deference, they say. It says the whole concept of political loyalty, of which the worship of the image was an expression, is bound up in the idea that Nebuchadnezzar's gods have favored him and given him victory to be that person in charge of the world, right? To challenge his gods, therefore, is to challenge Nebuchadnezzar himself and to raise a question as to the political integrity of the three men accused. As proof of their suspicions, they charged Daniel's three friends with not worshiping the golden image. The argument was calculated to arouse the anger of Nebuchadnezzar and to bring about the downfall of these three men and the possibility that the Chaldeans themselves would be then given greater authority, be elevated again. So they're out for who? Themselves. Not for the king, not for the kingdom, themselves. So the argument and the accusation of the Chaldeans had a telling effect upon Nebuchadnezzar. And let's see. I think we're going to see this next part here, so I'm not going to read that. Well, let's look at the allegiance declared. Allegiance declared. Now, and so once again, let's play our MP3 one more time. Plays, and what happens? They have to do something, don't they? Just like when you hear the ruffles and flourishes, you snap to attention, right? Same thing, right? Okay, that's all. Because some people in here didn't hear it the first time, that's why. I had to do it twice. Anyway, so for these first 5 verses, I want you to notice the ways that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego showed their loyalty to God alone. Let's look at our second verse we're going to look at today, Daniel 3, 14 through 18. Go for it. That's all right.
Nebuchadnezzar responded and said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you are ready, at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, and bagpipe, and all kinds of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, very well. But if you do not worship, you will be immediately cast into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. And what God is there for you who can deliver you out of my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you answer concerning this matter. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the furnace of the blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hands, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known, O king, that we are not going to serve your God or worship the golden image that you have set up."
So Nebuchadnezzar, he likes Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Why does he like them? First of all, they're friends of Daniel, okay? And so he knows that they have insight into spiritual matters, right? And he elevated them, right? So this is something you don't see very often. The king is doing what? He's giving them what? A second chance here. You know, explain yourself, give us a good reason, and guess what? Everything's going to be fine. Maybe you didn't understand, you know. When you hear all these instruments playing, by the way, in case you wonder what a trigon is, I looked it up. It's a 3-cornered, 4-stringed small instrument. Now that you know what a trigon is, your day is now complete. I said, what is a trigon? Anyway, that's one of the instruments. So this must have been quite a cacophony, by the way, of sound. They wanted to make sure everybody heard, you know. Everybody would know this is the time. So he's giving them a second chance, right? And what do those 3 loyal citizens of Babylon say? I don't think so. So we're gonna say, so he probably can't believe it, first of all, and he probably was confused, maybe, and he thought maybe they just don't quite understand. So I'll repeat all this again. How many times have we heard it now? 3 times, right? And so he's telling them again, right? So in verse 14, let me see, which one was that now? Okay, he seems what? Why do you think the king seemed confused by these 3 men's lack of respect? I don't know the answer. This was just something to throw out and talk about. Why would because he sounds like he's confused. Is it true? Scratching his head. Yeah, it can't be true. Is it true? Yeah. But not this way. So he's puzzled by this, right? He's not understanding. Now, you almost would think Nebuchadnezzar should have known this, of course, because of what? The experience before this, right? But you understand here, his culture and stuff is really ingrained. You know, the worship of many gods, their traditions, the way they do things, their laws. And so to overcome all that in one incident is probably not going to happen. Now, in that first incident where Daniel told him what the dream meant, it was awe-inspiring to him, so he elevated him. But it doesn't mean he necessarily became a believer or anything like that. So he's still probably still going through the process of understanding more and more about what this Jewish God is, you know, that they're talking about. So he is puzzled, right? And so he goes through all this with him again, right? And then they say what? We will not. So what was the basis, do you think, of these three men's challenge? It says three men. These three young men, probably young teenagers. What was the basis of this reply? What was it based upon? Their allegiance to God. Exactly. We're talking about allegiance today, right? Demonstrating allegiance. And they had made a commitment at the very beginning when they were taken in captivity that they would do what? Remember their God, even in captivity. They would do the things that would honor God, even in captivity. You have to admire that. You just have to admire that. The fact that they made that kind of a stand and they realized that no matter what, they were gods, whatever country they're in. You know, God is not just the God of Israel. God is the God of the universe. And so that was something that most people at that day and age doesn't know. God doesn't guarantee that his followers will never suffer or experience death. He doesn't say that. Yet God does promise to always be what? With them. Right? That's exactly right. Even if they have to suffer death in a burning for a Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refuse to forsake their God. So does this sound familiar? Does this kind of thing? Okay, one of the first people to suffer after Christ went into heaven. Who was that? Remember who that was? He was one of the ones that were selected in the book of Acts to serve at tables. Stephen, yeah. He did a similar thing, didn't he? You know, he did not bow the knee, if you will, in that case either. He gave witness, and he suffered a terrible death because of that. And sometimes we think, well, he wasted his life doing that. No, he didn't. We have his message, don't we? We have Stephen's message. We also know something else. Did he have a profound effect upon somebody else that was watching all this? He did. A man called Saul of Tarsus. And you know it wasn't wasted on him. He probably thought about that before his Damascus Road experience, and that changed his life at that point. Anyway, so what are some examples you know of where Christians have suffered similarly? And I already gave you one. It says, Norm, you stole mine. Sorry. Is there any others you can think of where Christians have suffered in a similar way? Oh, some of you know some of the missionaries, perhaps. Jim Elliot, missionary in South America? Ecuador, yeah. Right. Yep.
That enabled the gospel to actually be brought
Right.
to the people.
Many people would say that Jim Elliot and his friends died needlessly, okay? And he was naive in what he did. And that might be that might be partially true. But it paved the way for this people group to learn the gospel. Yes, it did. It rearranged how they thought. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And everything.
It made them reevaluate everything. Those natives had to suddenly realize these people died for something. And they were curious as to what they died for. And that paved the way for him. There's also, of course, I did a study of the how the New Testament came to us, and in the process of the English translation being brought to us, was many people who suffered, some terribly. Some were burned at the stake just because they wanted the average person to be able to read the scriptures. This was like in England where these things happened. And we don't think of that thing happening like that back in those times. But it did. People suffered terribly for different things where they took a stand, where they knew God wanted them to. You were going to say something else?
I was just going to say, this is also true of many tribal groups in Africa when the gospel was initially being brought to Africa.
Right.
Many white Westerners were coming and they were dying from the local diseases, but they kept coming, and that Africans sat back and, why do you keep coming here?
Right.
What's the purpose of this?
Yeah. Other people groups had similar experiences where the missionaries kept coming and they didn't know why, even though they died and they suffered.
And you will find very similar stories in the Middle East and in Central Asia as to why this message of the gospel, why are you persistent in it?
That's going on today, by the way, right now. It's happening in Afghanistan. It's happening in Iran. It's happening in Iraq. Yes.
Christian history.
Yes, throughout Christian history. So anyway, we need to go along because I got a little bogged down here. I apologize. But we see that he is giving them a second chance, right? And they said, I'm sorry, King. We have to do what? We have to be true to our God. We can't bow down to this and worship it, because that's essentially worshiping not just necessarily you, but it's also worshiping all the idols you represent, because that was the whole purpose of this, right? So let's look at the next part in our verses. Who's got number 3? Daniel 3:19 through 23.
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with wrath, and his facial expression was altered towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He answered by giving orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than it usually was heated. He commanded certain valiant warriors who were in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in order to cast them into the furnace of blazing fire. Then these men were tied up in their trousers, their cloaks, their coats, their caps, and other clothes, and were cast into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. And for this reason, because the king's command was urgent and the furnace had been made extremely hot, the flame of the fire slew those men, killed them, who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire, still tied up.
So,
Dun, dun, dun.
So when Nebuchadnezzar heard these words from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, he was satisfied, right? Mollified. No, he was furious. He was angry but curious before. Now he is furious. It says he's so mad. Have you ever seen somebody so mad their face contorts because they can't contain it anymore? Yes. And right to his face. And you know, so you understand where Nebuchadnezzar is coming from. He is, like I said, the king of the known world, and this is happening to him, right? So he basically that's it. I gave you your chance. Now you're going to pay, right? Were you going to say something a moment ago? Okay. So they had failed to give the king his due respect. This is on page 87. I'm just going to read this little part here. And he had the right to defend his honor as king. And when it says he's furious, it says he could not have gotten any angrier, is what it means. Now, it says they heated the furnace up 7 times. Did they have a little indicator to the side that said 1 time, 2 times, 3 times? No, they did not. What that means is as hot as they possibly could. I mean, the max they could get a heat on this furnace. That's what it was. So when you see that superlative of 7 times, it doesn't necessarily mean times 7 in what we would think Western thought, but it means hotter than it could ever normally be considered. And then he picked the strongest, most valiant people he had to tie these guys up in their clothes, which I always wondered. I guess being tight, made the point of being in your clothes is you think you're hot in the furnace, you're going to be even hotter because you got your clothes on too. I don't know what the purpose of that was. Yes. Yeah. Well, I think it was also for effect too, because this was something that people could observe apparently. And so he was going to have them tossed in this fire with their clothes on so people could see their clothes burning off and their skin burning up and they're just going to bones in front of them. Sort of like one of those Indiana Jones movies, like when the Nazis got melted down, by... that's what he was thinking. I'm going to see that. And what did we see instead? We see what? Yeah, they were thrown in. What happened to those valiant, strong, beefy guys? They died. They died. It was so hot, they died, it says. And so we see that they were thrown in the midst of the fire, right? It says, but these 3 men fell into the midst of the furnace of the blazing fire, still tied up. So they fall into there, and they expected them to what? It's like in the 007 movie, I think, Goldfinger. What do you expect? I expect you to die, Mr. Bond. They expected them to die in a painful manner. A very apt display for everyone to know about and many to see. Probably they wanted to make this an example that no one would dare go against the king again, right? So, let me make sure I don't miss something here. Why should believers not be surprised by the response of others when we express our faith and loyalty in Christ? Are things like that going to happen? Are we going to be thrown in the fiery furnace? No. But will we suffer of some sort of pain, some sort of problems in our life sometimes when we make a stand? Possibly, yes. 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 Going on right now today. We see a clear connection, though, regarding the experience of the persecution of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego with Jesus' persecution and his warnings to us. Folks, we are warned. It says, you will have suffering in this world. Be courageous, though. I have conquered the world. That's John 16:33, right? And later, Jesus also says, he promises us and says, remember, I am with you always to the end of the age, Matthew 28:20. So, how does the promise in the presence of God instill confidence in you guys, in Christians today, as we face these kind of challenges? Does that give us confidence in our life? I hope it does. It should, shouldn't it? Yeah. We should have that confidence, and we see many people have had it. Now, does it mean we always will display it? Probably not. There are times when we don't, right? But we should be ready for those times of testings, because they are coming, because Jesus himself told us, right? Let's look at let's look at the last point here. Daniel 3:24 through 26. Who has that one for me? That would be number 4.
Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astounded, and stood up in haste. He said to his high officials, was it not 3 men we cast bound into the midst of the fire? They replied to the king, certainly, O king. He said, look, I see 4 men loosed and walking about in the fire without harm, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the furnace of blazing fire. He responded and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out, you servants of the Most High God, and come here. And then they came out of the midst of the fire.
Wow. So we see what? We saw that allegiance was declared. We see that persecution intensified. We see that God has honored that faith, right? Because what happened to these men? The ropes burned off of them. They're walking around like there's no problem in the midst of this fire. Meanwhile, the bodies of the guards are out there burning up outside the furnace. It's so darn hot, right? But there's something else they see. What do they see? 1, 2, 3. 4th person. Who is that 4th person? That's a good question. We don't know exactly. Many theorize it's what they refer to as a Christophany. It could be the pre-incarnate Christ. It could also be an angel sent by God to protect them as well. We don't know which one it was. But we do know that it was a heavenly creature, heavenly being, a person with power to protect them, right? Protect them. And that's exactly right. God's presence is being shown here to the king. The king is now witnessing something that very few people witness. He's given that opportunity to see something here. Yes, exactly right. So these words and phrases we just talked about describe the king's response to what he saw. Do we see a change of emotion here? Well, the first emotion we saw was what? Curiosity, then rage, and then we what? Bewilderment, maybe surprise, maybe relief too, because these people were somebody he'd put in charge, and now he's in a way being shown he didn't make a mistake. But I think that probably came later, you realize it. But he says, look, you guys, take a look, all you satraps, you governors, look what that's going on in there. They all saw that, right? So we got to finish up here. We're almost out of time. So we have another verse I want to quickly read, 27 through 30. Who's got that one?
The satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's high officials gathered around and saw in regard to these men that the fire had no effect on the bodies of these men, nor was the hair of their heads singed, nor were their trousers damaged, nor had the smell of fire even come upon them. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who put their trust in him, violating the king's command, and yielded up their bodies so as not to serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or tongue that speaks anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses reduced to a rubbish heap, inasmuch as there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way. Then the king caused Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to prosper in the province of Babylon.
But God was with those men, right? God was with them in the fire. What's interesting to me, I had a friend that had a fire in his garage, okay? And when they put the fire out, it wasn't that big a deal. But that smell of that fire went throughout the whole house. And for weeks, and probably longer, they scrubbed the ceiling, they scrubbed the walls, they scrubbed the floors, they put new carpet in. They still had that smell of that fire in that house. Here these guys come out. They can't even smell the fire on him. Do you realize that the rope's burned off, but and their clothes their trousers and all their clothes are perfectly fine. And there's not. Do you think they were providentially helped a little bit there? I think so. That's an obvious thing. And this was not missed by the king. And he basically said, "Look, guys, look. This is that God. We're gonna make a law right now. And if somebody goes against him, guess what? You're going to be torn limb from limb, and your house turned into a trash heap." Do you think that king's emotions went from one side to the other? Radically, right? We see that, don't we? So God honored the stand that Meshach, Abednego, and Shadrach did, right? He honored that. He honors those commitments that we have today, too, as well, folks. And that's the lesson. That's the main part of our lesson today. We talked about Christians can express trust in God in all circumstances. Oh, we got a key verse. I forgot that. Who's got the last one? Number 6.
King Nebuchadnezzar. What verse are you on?
247.
Oh, okay. King Nebuchadnezzar answered Daniel and said, Surely your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, since you have been able to reveal this mystery.
Now, this is a look back at the previous chapter where he had revealed the dream to Nebuchadnezzar. But this is applying it throughout this part we're talking about here as a key verse. And we see that this is a key. The King Nebuchadnezzar is understanding this more and more and more. It's a process that he's being grown up into by Daniel and his 3 friends, right? And this is just one component of that. So he's realizing more and more and more that there is only this one God, apparently, and he's in charge of everybody. And it's a hard foreign concept for him to understand. But that the king's response is an interesting thing to see there. But anyway, back to our summary points. We're going to wind this up. Christians can express trust in God in all circumstances. That's the first one. Second one, Christians can expect non-believers to take extreme actions of persecution at times. Isn't that true? It can happen. Maybe not extreme all the time. Maybe it's just a little thing. But it can be, those kind of things can happen to us. Be ready for that. Third point is that Christians bring honor to God through their faithfulness to him. People folks will see your faithfulness. You may not realize it. They will see it, and then later on, when a situation comes in their own life, guess who they're going to talk to? They're going to talk to you. Be ready. Be ready for the circumstances. It's happened to me that way. It'll happen to you as well. So, how? Sort of a question that's rhetorical here. How is a person's loyalty to God in all situations a measure of that person's faith in God? And that's a good thing for us to consider in our own lives, isn't it? So the challenge from our study today is to find out ways that we can help each other as well to remain faithful to God when facing a challenge to our faith. And that's going to happen to each one of us. Any questions or comments? Sorry I had to rush the last little bit. There's some good stuff in here. Good stuff in this one. Let's go ahead and close in a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this example we see of these three young men, Lord, who were not afraid to take that stand for you. Lord, help us in the same way as these young teenagers did in our lives to make those stands that you want us to make, Lord, to remain loyal to you, to have our allegiance to you first of all. Lord, I just thank you because we owe to you our highest love and reverence and obedience. Thank you for your faithfulness to us, Lord. And Lord, we do pledge our allegiance to you to remain faithful throughout our own lives. Thank you in Jesus' name.